Well, hello, minders. Season's greetings, a very warm Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone. As I record this, it's just a few days before Christmas. I finally have somewhat of a voice that I can do this. Just a bit of a cold I had to get over. All right, so what I decided to do this time was another seasonal piece, but something that you can have fun with and at the same time build some skills. The reason this is a great skill builder is because there's just a lot of controlled washes involved. This is Kilimanjaro cold press paper. You know, I kind of had the idea of going for a almost storybook look to this candle, so it's going to be a bit exaggerated and might be something like you would see, an animated feature, that kind of a thing. So I wanted this whole melty kind of candle to look like it had seen a lot of hours of being lit, maybe being read by. And I'm just throwing in some holly down at the bottom to make it a Christmas candle. It's going to be all very dark with one central glowing light, and that's the flame. But I've got a sketch that I'm pretty happy with, drawing. And the one mistake I made is that I really had planned to lighten that pencil a lot more and redraw the whole thing in watercolor pencil. Forgot to do that. I got really anxious to paint this and ended up wetting all the paper in the background. Problem is, when you wet graphite, it sets it in almost as if it were watercolor pencil, and it's very hard to erase afterwards. So I call this a skill builder again because there's going to be a lot of thought that goes into where the light is, and I'm doing this whole thing in transparent watercolor, with the exception of some of the holly and berries, and we'll get to that later. A little bit of gouache will be involved, but in terms of the light and the flame, I'm not using any opaque for that, which is a common way to treat light, to use an opaque and come in afterwards. I'm going to try to do this totally transparently, which means I have to plan for the light and paint around it and leave it. That means a lot of controlled, blended out washes. I started out with an Indian yellow because I wanted to tone that whole paper gold. And that's working out pretty well. Mixed a little bit of red iron oxide with it and neutral tint to give me the darker tones. And I'm still just establishing that light pattern. And basically, I call this a skill builder because it's just going to be a lot of layering, a lot of thinking through where the light is, and a lot of controlled washes, one upon the other, until I get a nice graduation of central light out to the darkest edges. Determining light fall on objects takes good reference, just takes a lot of thought, observation of their good reference, and then careful planning. So I felt like it was a good exercise for me as well. Yeah, a lot of blending, a lot of paying attention to where my edges were and whether they needed to be soft or hard. So if you want to practice your blending and getting smooth washes, and then layering those washes, this is the way to do it. By the way, I'm using soft brushes. I'm using silver brush black velvets. Paint lifts pretty easily off of Kilimanjaro. And you want to make sure that your layers do not pick up a lot of the underlying paint. The whole process, as I've said, is a lot of controlled washes, but also a lot of adjusting values. Now here's the thing about candles. Candlelight, or any glowing light that needs to look like it's glowing in the dark. The light part of it, the light source part of it, which in this case is the flame, is the brightest value in the entire piece. Nothing else on the page will be as bright as that flame. It's a bit of logic that you need to repeat to yourself and say, I've got to bring down the value of everything else, especially if you're working transparently. I did have a tiny bit of yellow toning in the background, but that flame is the brightest part. Everything else has got to be darker. That even includes the candle. Now the flame will illuminate the candle itself, and it'll glow because it's translucent wax. It'll glow down through its core. And so the candle itself will appear to glow. Some of these darker areas, as I make the layers darker and darker towards the outer edge, I tried doing it in pieces. Here I started using a cool wash. You'll see I ended up abandoning that and going more towards very warm washes. I wanted to make the light fall off look cool. Instead it just looked kind of dark and black and flat and lifeless. So I was kind of proud of taking myself through this process. Getting a soft glow around something transparently, planning that kind of blend is a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's not real super easy. So that's why I call this a skill builder. I wanted to come back here in the bottom and start establishing that holly. The holly's going to be very dark, and even the berries are going to be fairly dark. And I will have just glints of highlights on the berries and some light falling in specific places on the holly. So that's what you're seeing me do here. It's just sort of establish some basic color. And I've got all that dark underpainting now. Here you can see me kind of changing the direction, going back to a warm background overall. And I think that was the way to go. So I go very gingerly. There's a jump, by the way, where I've actually added 2 or 3 more layers. And you can see the blends are starting to get really smooth now. And so I'm making sure it's very, very dry before I move on. And this is just that process. It's going through and adjusting those values. There's some great storybook inspiration for this kind of stuff. I mean, one of my favorites is The Secret of Nim, the opening. Maybe you've seen this opening with the candle being lit. Love, love, love that. It's one of my favorite animated films of all time. I kind of wanted to head in a storybook direction and wasn't sure if it would look that way or not, but I was happy to see that it did. The darker you get those surroundings, the more that flame just lights right up. I really had a lot of fun with this. The holly and the berries at the base are all going to be dark. I will end up with a few specular highlight. Hey, I said it, specular. A few specular highlights on those berries. I'm painting around where I want those highlights to be, but I'll come back and reinforce those with some gouache. And that, plus a few areas on the holly where I use gouache to smooth, and we'll talk about that in a minute, are the only places I used opaque paint. Just going to continue going through and adding the base colors to these bits of holly. Just want it to be a suggestion, really, not a lot of detail down here. And it's got to stay dark. But I've established that glow that I really wanted on the flame. At least I know where I'm going with it. I'll have a few more value adjustments to do yet. And you can see me bringing down the value of that holly. And all of that just adds to that glow. More color, glow adjustment back there. Still needed to lower the background value some. Getting some more of that warm glow. And I think I've got that background about where I want it. Here I'm just going to add a couple bokeh shapes. I wanted to make a little more interest in that background. Number of ways you can do that. I'm just using a damp, not at all wet, just a slightly damp brush, and then blotting with tissue through a circle template to pull up these little bokeh shapes. Bokeh is just out of focus points of light. Now here's where I was talking about using the gouache on the holly. I felt like the washes down there were just getting very splotchy and not looking very smooth, and gouache is a good smoother. So hope you enjoyed that as much as I did making it. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, everyone. It has been a great year. The Minder community, I think, is one of the best art communities on YouTube, if I do say so myself. Looking forward to 2022 and doing a whole lot more with you guys. Until then, everybody have a very, very Merry Christmas, wonderful Happy New Year, and we will talk to you in 2022. Bye-bye.